Hi, I'm Linda Novy, and this is my friend and colleague Juan Amador, and we're at Cascade Farms, and it's winter season. What we're going to do today is show you how to use the trimmings from your garden and landscape and recraft them into a hot compost pile that you can then use in the spring or even in the winter to feed your vegetable garden and maybe some of your container plantings. It's really easy, and it's a little bit like baking a cake. We've got all our ingredients out here ready to go. We just chipped up a lot of the garden trimmings, the grapevines, the raspberries, the baccaris out here in the garden. We chipped mugwort, a lot of different things that have plant material that have brown and green. So that's what this is right here. And we use this 5 horsepower Craftsman chipper that shred everything up. This gets your pile hot faster. So right here we've got a pretty good mix of about 2 to 1 brown to green. Brown and green. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about it as we add the ingredients. Let's get started baking the cake. Well, you can see initially we've got a few branches on the bottom of this wire screen. Go ahead, and so here's our branches, and that's going to facilitate a little bit of airflow because the soil critters that are going to help us make compost need air. What we're putting on the very bottom of the pile are some green plants I took out of some containers and soil. So that's kind of a nice base, so we'll throw that in. The wire bin is about 3.5 feet tall and about 3.5 feet wide, maybe 15 linear feet of 2 by 1 inch, pretty heavy gauge wire. And we just have it clipped together with these plastic ties. Our colleague Manuel is standing by with a hose because as we layer our compost cake, we're going to be wetting down each layer. And because it's winter and there's a little bit of rain, we're going to be covering it with the tarp at the very end so that it doesn't get too wet. We want, just like when you're baking, you want just the right amount of moisture. We're going to be doing a blend of browns and greens. Because my property creates a lot of brown, I have to really hunt hard to find greens. So we'll probably end up with a little bit more fungal-dominated compost. So we're looking at 50% browns, about 35% greens, and then about 15% of our high nitrogen compost starter. Our compost starter you can buy at the store. It's mostly organic fertilizers. E.B. Stone makes it. A lot of other companies make a nice organic compost starter. It's a blend of organic fertilizers. I've also got, I bought bulk organic fertilizers, some of the same ingredients, feather meal, and that kind of thing. No blood meal in this, but feather meal, chicken manure, bat guano, alfalfa meal. I also use a lot of alfalfa pellets. This is real economical to get. It's about $18 for a 50-pound bag. And then I have this fertilizer here that got wet and it went bad. It's soybean based, and we're going to use that too. And these are going to heat up the pile because they're readily digestible by the soil organisms. So now we just layered our mix of brown and green, and we're going to give it a little water because we're going to water each layer just so everything stays moist. We're going to add some compost starter. We want to make sure we get all of the compost pile moist. Just like when we turn it, we want to turn it inward. We want to make sure we're addressing the whole pile. Okay, is that looking good, Juan? Okay, so now we're going to take our compost thermometer and we're going to put it in the pile right here. And in a couple hours, this should be heating up. We'll come back and check it. And we're going to cover it with a tarp We're going to cover it with a tarp for now and just see what happens with the rain. We don't want the organisms to drown. So, there you have it. Compost, Hot Compost 101. We'll see you in a couple weeks and see how our cake is cooking. Bye. Hi, we're back at the active compost pile about 2 weeks later. We started this pile on 12/15 and it's 12/31 today. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the pile and let's talk about the phases of composting. The first 2 days of the compost pile after we made it, the temperature went from about 50 to 80 to about 100. That's the mesophilic range or phase of the compost. And there are organisms that really like operating, decomposing at that temperature range. And the activity of these organisms, digesting the cellulose and breaking down the proteins, their metabolic activity releases heat. And that woke up the organisms, the bacteria and fungi and other organisms that function at a higher rate, the thermophilic range. And so the compost pile has been about 150, 140, and now let's look at the thermometer here. It's at 120 degrees. I can still see the original materials, however, in the compost. I still see leaves. There are lots of insects floating around. So I want to keep this pile in the thermophilic or hot range for a few more weeks until there's further decomposition. Let's check the moisture level. If I can squeeze water out of the pile, it's too wet. The moisture's really good. I couldn't do that. And look at all the water vapor. Look at all the water vapor moving out of this pile. It's hot in here. So we're going to turn the pile, bring more oxygen in to get the heat back up. We're going to do that right now, and it's a good ab workout. So when we're turning the compost pile, what we want to do is take the outer material and move it to the inner pile, and we want to take the material on the top and move it to the bottom. So I just start by going around the edges, right into the middle. Now you'll see there's a little ash, little material in this pile that looks like, oh, it got burned. That's because my pile got too hot for a couple days. See right there, it got up to about 160. So what I did was, it was raining at that time, I took the top off the pile and I let some rain get into it. And that helped cool it down. But it did run hot for a while. And you don't want to do that because that burns the carbon off and it releases it and nitrogen to the atmosphere. We want to keep all that good stuff right here in the pile. So you can see all the water vapor coming off. One good thing when the pile gets to that 150 stage, in the thermophilic stage, weed seeds, fly larvae, and pathogenic organisms are burned off. They are decomposed. They're killed, essentially. And I definitely want compost that has no viable weed seeds in it. So we're just going to keep working our way around the pile. So my friend Heather and I just turned the pile. We moved the outside to the inside, the top to the bottom. And I'm going to reinsert the thermometer right in the center here. And you can still see the leaves and some of the original materials. And we want that all to be indistinguishable and just turn into a nice crumbly compost. So we're going to let it go at this thermophilic stage for probably another couple weeks. Probably turn it one more time to bring the temperature up or maintain it in that 120 to 130 range. So we'll come back in a couple weeks and see how our compost is doing. Hi, we're back with the compost at yet a new stage in its development. We're going to have a maturation phase or a curing phase for the compost. And this is really important because I can still see some of the original shapes of the feedstocks in this compost. It's not completely broken down. And you don't want to take an immature compost and put it out around your plants because there are phytotoxic compounds that could damage the plant roots. We want this compost to go through a longer, maybe 6 weeks to 2 month curing process where it creates more humus, it aggregates a little bit, and where the final decomposition of these materials takes place. So we're not quite there yet. Now, because this compost pile reached a very hot temperature, about 160, which is too hot, you usually don't want to go above 140, 150. In that thermal process, a lot of the soil organisms are killed or go dormant. So we want to re-inoculate. We want to put life back into this compost. So how do we do that? Well, a couple ideas. A couple ways to do that. First off, I hope some passing birds will fly by and poop in the compost. That will inoculate it with organisms that have been in their guts. Also, you can use compost tea. I use this product from Earthfort that Marine Soil Solutions sells called Soil Provide, which is loaded with microorganisms, and then I gave them Soil Revive, which contains food for the microorganisms, and I mixed it in the proper solution in my little handy dandy sprayer with water, and I sprayed all the compost with it. I also went to kind of a wild part of my yard, and I got some leaf duff that's got a lot of diversity of organisms in it, and I spread that on the compost as well. So we are recolonizing the soil microbes in the compost, adding diversity, and then shredders and grazing organisms will come in and continue to break down this compost. It's always a learning experience when you make compost. Feedstocks can be different, weather conditions are different. When this compost was cooking, it was around 40 degrees outside. So things are always changing. The curing process is very important. It's adding more oxygen, more organisms, and we're giving this compost a chance to really stabilize and finish, if you will. Well, lessons learned. What did I learn from this batch of compost? Because, you know, every batch is different and we learn from each one. I kept notes as I made this compost, and in looking back over the whole process, pile got a little too hot. What does that mean? I should back off a little bit on the high nitrogen materials. As I turned the pile, I realized there were some compost hot spots, and there was some ash where it got too hot. More turning of the pile would have helped distribute the organisms and brought more oxygen in and cooled the pile down. So next time I'm going to remember to do that. So we have these feedback loops that help us, you know, adjust when we make compost. The organisms in their reproduction, they're replicating themselves exponentially. That's what really heated the pile up, and they love the high nitrogen materials, primarily the bacteria. So that's where that excessive heat came from. So it's always good to look at what you've done. The compost today, you'll see it's come down from this high to about a third of that original amount. It smells great, so I know that I did have an aerobic process. I can still see some original pieces of material, so it needs more time to fully break down. In this curing process, after the inoculation I did with recolonizing bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and protozoa, other critters are going to come in and they're going to continue to break down this organic matter, the food resources, until there's no more to break down. And then I'll have more humus. It'll be a stable form of carbon and nitrogen, and I can safely apply it to my garden. And because we're having a run of sunny weather right now without much rain, I'm keeping this pile moist, and I'm also going to give it a little protection from the sun because I don't just want it out here baking in the sun. So this isn't a tarp. This is row cover. It's breathable, and I'm just going to cover this up and protect it a little bit. I welcome your feedback, questions. Love to share your experiences making compost, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the garden soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.